We're just hitting the Fords now. Okay, well here's that cylinder head I was telling you guys about. I started pulling off. Had this thing off in like 5 minutes to the point where you see where it's at. I just want to show you something. Found this pretty coincidental. There's a 1.9 up here that somebody yanked, and I was like, oh man, this head looks real clean. I wonder why they left it sitting here. And I came over here. Look what we got. That one lost the valve seat as well on the intake side. That was a pretty clean head too. Just goes to show you, just never know what you're gonna get. Okay guys, there you have it. When they say cylinder head, they want it stripped down to just the cylinder head and the valves. So no cam, no exhaust manifold, no intake manifold, no thermostat housing, pretty much just a bare cylinder head, which I'd rather use what I have anyway, to be honest with you. So we're good to go. Okay guys, I just got back to the shop. As you can see, it's right around 11:45. I pulled a piston in addition with the head while I was at the yard. It appeared to be in real good shape, this engine, and it had pretty low miles on it, believe it or not. It was right around 90-some thousand. It was an accident. I always like that style. That's one thing I should have mentioned when I was at the yard. When you're looking for parts like this, pull something that looks like it's been wrecked. At least you know it was running prior to being scrapped or brought to the recycle yard. So this piston I took and I cleaned it up already, made sure it's spotless. That's one of your main things. That's the crucial thing about when you're dealing with internal parts. You want to make sure everything is clean and spotless. So as you can see, I took and I cleaned it thoroughly in the parts washer and then sprayed it down with some cleaner. I took and I cleaned the ring landings with an old ring. I took one and snapped it in half. I don't even know what I did with that piece. What you do, you pretty much just take that after it's broken in half, and you take the edge of the ring and you just run it around that landing and get all the carbon out, and do the same thing with all the landings, get everything as clean as possible. I guess it's time to start popping that piston, so I'm going to go drain the oil and drop in the pan. Okay, as you can see, for me to pull this pan I had to remove the jack out from underneath the oil pan, and if you remember looking back, thinking back on the video, I had to remove that motor mount. So what I did temporarily, instead of putting an engine support brace across this, it was quicker for me to just temporarily reinstall the motor mount, and that'll hold the engine up for me. I just have a couple bolts started and a through bolt on the mount. So now we can start yanking that pan. In addition, I'm going to just take in the 2 bolts on the back flange of the exhaust and just take the front cat pipe out of our way. Okay guys, give me a clear shot dropping that pan. I removed the front cat from the intermediate pipe. Came down, removed all the bolts around the perimeter of the oil pan. They're easy to get to. There's 2 bolts that go through the oil pan to the bell housing of the transmission. You don't want to remove them. I'm just leaving this pan here to catch the oil from the pickup tube. Like I mentioned, everything looks real clean. I got no debris in the oil. I just went around and felt the bearing caps. Everything feels real nice. So we're going to take and we're going to remove the 2 retaining nuts from the number 3 bearing cap, and then we're going to take and pop the piston out. Okay guys, hopefully you can see up there okay. I got the 2 retaining bolts removed. Now what I do to get the piston to start popping up, I use the backside of a hammer. It could be plastic, wooden, you just want something softer than the material you're hitting. So a wooden backside of a hammer works great. Now I'll just take and I'll tap it up. I want to use both hands because I don't want to drop this cap even though we're replacing it. I just want to try to save that bearing if it's in good shape. So I'm going to take and tap that up a little bit and see what we got. Okay, get the lower cap off. Just want to show you guys so far. Bearings still look like brand new. something with the bearing the rod half. Nothing wrong with this engine, guys. See how clean this thing is? It's unbelievable. See how them rings are frozen in that landing? The top of this piston got pushed down. Now we're over at the bench. Maybe I'll give you a better example. You just have regular wear on those bearings. They look brand new, to be honest with you. Very little wear. So we want to take extreme caution not to get any dirt or any scoring on them bearings. I'm going to reuse them. However, the piston, I don't think I'm going to get so lucky with the rings. Because if you take notice, these pistons should be able to move back and forth freely in these ring landings, like I mentioned earlier. And as you can see, they're compressed in and they're not moving. That's because when it got impacted up here, it's a soft aluminum. And my suspicions were correct. I guess you could call me the engine whisperer or something. You know, you got the dog whisperer, you got people that talk to the dead. I guess I could kind of predict what's going on with an engine. That just comes with experience, guys, especially when I came from a family that's what we specialized in, was engine rebuilding. But as you can see, the top of the piston got collapsed, pinched the ring into the landing, and it's shot. So, needs to be replaced. I just took and spun this bearing out of the rod, and pretty much you see how you have your lock? You'll have a locking tab on the bearing too. When you put it in, you spin it in this way. When you push it out, you just spin it out so the lock comes out of the tab. It's easy to tell this one from the used one I got. So as you can see, this one, you can actually see the babbitt is worn away, and the one from our engine looks brand new. That's what I mean, guys. If I were to take that engine as a used whole and put it in, look how much better shape this lower end is compared to this lower end. What I'm going to try to do now, and I doubt very highly I'm going to be successful, I'm going to try to spin the rings out of the landings just so I can compare them to the used ones that I got from the yard. And what I'll do, I'll stick these in the cylinders, and I'll measure our gap, and I'll demonstrate that later, and compare it to the used ones to see how much of a difference we have. Worst comes to worst, I'll pick up a set of rings. So let's see if I can spin this out. I doubt very highly I'm going to get this upper ring off. Same with the lower one. I'll give it a whirl. Actually, if I could get it right there is where it's pinched. If I could get it to come out, we could at least compare this one. Got it. There you go. Unreal. I doubt I'm going to get that lucky on the top one. I'm not even going to attempt it, to be honest with you. Nope. I already broke it. That's how pinched that is. I can't even get that top one out, but at least we have something to compare the other rings to, and I'll show you how I'm going to go about doing that. Now, as far as the oil ring goes, I can tell that's pretty free, so I'm just going to take and grab one of the little retainers, spin them off. Just take a look at that piston, guys. These were all new when I rebuilt it. As you can see, very clean engine. What a shame. Okay, I should have checked this before I went to the yard. However, I'm almost certain I used standard pistons last time. So 3.224. Want to make sure you hold the square. 3.224. So we're good. So they're both standard pistons. Okay, what I'm going to do now, guys, is I'm going to check the end clearance on the piston rings in the cylinder. And how I'm going to do this, it's just a quick technique I learned a long time ago to make sure I got everything square. I'm going to take one of the old rings from the old piston. Coincidentally enough, I called Advanced Auto Parts and they have a set of rings in stock and a set of bearings. So I may just go and pick them up. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to just take and spin this top ring in, just like so. See how I can move these around, guys? That's the way it's supposed to be. Maybe I'll go down to the second landing. Okay. That'll allow me to get down there a little bit further. Now I'm going to take you out to the vehicle and show you how I'm going to check the end clearance on this old ring. What I'm going to do is take in the known piston ring that I pulled out of the engine. I'm just going to take and start it in the cylinder like so. Okay. Now the problem is, I don't know if I'm square. I want to check this clearance, but I'm most likely not square. So that's why I installed this one ring on this landing. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take and put the piston upside down and push it until that ring touches the head surface. And that should be pretty much square. Now what I want to do is take and measure that gap. So another thing I want you to take note, see how that ring has a little dot on it? That's an indicator that faces up. Whenever you have a ring with a dot, most times you got to follow the recommendations and the instructions. You got to follow them to a T. But most times that dot, especially on Piston rings, and most manufacturers still have some kind of indication. Sometimes they're with paint. However, this one uses a dot. I believe these were Piston rings I used. That dot always faces up. Okay, I just looked up the specs on the second ring. It should be anywhere from 10 to 30 thousandths. I'm going to start out with a 15. Okay, I can't fit that in there. Go down to 11. Okay, 11 I fit in there nice. And I'd say that's pretty darn good. As you can see, this engine had very little wear on it, guys. That 11 thousandths is about as tight as I'm going to fit in there. So the specs were anywhere from 10 to 30, and we're only 1/1000th over the minimum mark. So you don't want it any tighter than the specs because you don't have any room for expansion at that point. So you want to make sure it's at least specs, if not a little loose. It's better to be loose than tight, believe it or not. So we know we're well within specs on that lower compression ring. I'm going to compare it to the ring that we removed from the used piston and see where they stand. Okay guys, same thing. Push it down nice and square until it hits. And this one, I guess I'll start out with a 12 right away. See the 12 fits in there but no problem. Go to the 15. I'm hoping you guys are able to see this. 15 fits in there with no problem. So these rings are showing much greater wear. Here's a 25. Let's see what we got. Yeah, we got about 25 thousandths in clearance on this ring. 12 to 25, that's a pretty big stretch. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go pick up a set of new rings since they have them in stock. And if I have to file them a little bit, I will, to match the other rings. I'm assuming that the other ones are probably right around 12 as well, since this was built at the same time. I'm expecting a pretty well even wear pattern. So I want to file the new rings to 12 thousandths. Okay guys, I can't stress enough, you got to do your measurements. You don't want a ring that fits too tight, otherwise that's how you end up popping pistons, you end up breaking rings, and a lot of different other things, because you need room for expansion and you don't want them to fit too loose either. So what you do, I took the old ring like you see me demonstrate before, and we had right around 11 thousandths end gap. So I got the new set of rings, and what I did, I got the Piston rings. They come with the pack. When you open it up, it tells you top, bottom, oil ring, so it's pretty hard to get them mixed up. But the top ring actually has an inner groove with a dot on the top, and that inner groove faces upwards and the dot always faces up. That's your first compression ring. Your second compression ring is pretty much looks square, however it has a dot and that faces up as well. So what I did, I took a set of rings and I had one that was right around 10 thousandths, and when I measured our old ones, you knew they were around 11. So I took that set of rings and I put a file in the vise and I just worked it. This is an old ring here, so I'm not too concerned. I just worked it and kept on measuring it. So now I have 2 matching rings that should match the other cylinders. I want to try to keep a pretty good balance. So now I'm ready to install the rings. Before I install the rings on the piston, what you'll see here, I just did this as a quick demonstration. I just wanted to try to find center of that wrist pin. I got it close, you know, it's not 100%. And then I just drew a line the other way to find center. What I like to do is use the 45-degree method from the wrist pin. I don't like installing any of the gaps, ring gaps above the wrist pin unless otherwise suggested by the manufacturer. However, when I build motors, I usually use this as a rule of thumb and never really have an issue with it. I apologize for this, guys. While I was laying out the top of the piston for the ring clocking, my battery went dead in the camcorder. I didn't realize it until it was too late. However, in the next video clip, you will see that it is all laid out, and we do install the rings in this manner. However, I drew up this quick illustration to demonstrate how I laid it out and one of the techniques for clocking rings. When I say clocking rings, it's pretty much the gap. You know that end gap that we measured in the cylinder when we were checking our rings? Well, that gap, what you don't want is like compression ring 1 end gap right here and compression ring 2 end gap right here, because if these line up eventually, your compression is going to leak by, you're going to burn oil, it's not good. You don't want your compression rings to line up. So a good rule of thumb and a good way of clocking rings is using this 45-degree method. Now, if you're looking down at your piston, say this is in the cylinder, you got your wrist pin that goes, your connecting rod is connected to this wrist pin. So it has a lot to do with heat and everything, but they don't recommend you, unless otherwise recommended by your service manual, to put your end gaps or your rings over top of your wrist pin or by your exhaust valve or intake valve. Now, I've done it in all different manners and never really had a problem. However, to set them up, this is just one method. So why they call this the 45-degree technique is because we're going pretty much 45-degree off the wrist pin for every ring gap. So if we start here at the wrist pin, my first compression ring is going to be 45-degree off our wrist pin and put us right here around 5 o'clock. Our second ring gap, compression ring gap, will be up here around 11 o'clock, 45 degrees this way off the wrist pin, or however you want to look at it. So pretty much why I use this method is that it prevents your compression rings from lining up, because like I mentioned before, you don't want one compression ring here, one compression ring there. So 180 out is a pretty far stretch. Now, you really don't have to clock your oil rings in this manner because they're not as critical. You still don't want your gaps to line up on your scraper rings, but you don't really have to go 180 out with these. I do anyway. I guess it's part of my OCD. However, oil ring 1 right around 7 o'clock, oil ring 2 right around 1 o'clock, and I think you get the picture. When you lay it out in this 45-degree method, it gives you a spot for all your ring gaps. So I hope that makes sense. I'm going to start with the oil expander. Pretty much it's this mesh looking, I'm not sure what you want to call it, type ridgy looking spring. They call that an expander. I'm not too concerned where this ends up because there really isn't no gap. Once you put your scrapers on, there's a little tiny ledge here that they push against and compress. But I'm going to put that towards the front of the piston. Why not? So, and if you remember, we have our oil 1, oil 2. So I'll orientate this one, the bottom one I'll call number 2, just for no apparent reason whatsoever. It's just what you don't want is both of the gaps lining up with each other. So put them 180 out from each other is pretty guaranteed that you're not going to line up. So I have my bottom second, I'll call it, oil ring up here around 1 o'clock. The second one I'm going to put down here around 7. As you can see how I spin these on. These oil expanders and scrapers are pretty flexible. Once you get into the other rings, you'll notice a big difference. You can't do that as easy. But as you see, once you get everything in place, as long as your landings are nice and clean, you'll be able to move the whole assembly back and forth with ease. You shouldn't feel any binding. If you do, pop it all back apart, scrape that landing a little better. But as long as you do a good job the first time, you'll be fine here. So now we want to do our compression rings. As you seen, I had compression 1 here, compression 2 here, so we'll call the second landing compression ring 2. The Piston rings, they'll come in a pack where they're pretty much laid out in the order that they go in. So the first ring in the pack will be ring number 1, compression ring, second ring, ring number 2, and then your oil ring, just like we installed that one. But however, your second, in case you don't have the pack to go off of, your second ring has a dot facing up, and this is a Piston, and an inner ledge. So the inner portion of this ledge actually has an angle, and it was aiming down. So the inner portion that goes inside that piston has an angle that's tapered down, but the dot always faces up. So we're going to go with our original layout. We're going to put our gap right at this 11 o'clock mark. Right there's the dot. I like spinning my rings on. They do have a tool for doing this. However, I think I broke more rings with the tool than without it. Now for our top compression ring, we're going to put that one right down here around 5 o'clock. This one dot facing up, just like the bottom one, and this one has a taper on the inside, on the top side. So just like so. Everything should spin nice and free. Okay, since I have these compression rings floating around here, I don't want to take a chance of messing anything up, so I'm going to just take and put my compressor, spring compressor on real quick. This is just a cheap one. However, it pretty much just goes over like so. It's supposed to have a special tool that turns it. Make sure your gaps are set before going to this step. Just like working everything around a little bit. Okay, now it's time to install the rod bearings. We're just going to take and remove these 2 retaining nuts. They call this the cap. So a rod journal. I want to make sure everything's spotless. And if you take notice, you have this notch. They call that a lock. That's your bearing lock. Your bearing will have the same lock on it. And as you can see, this is a STD. It's a standard bearing for this vehicle. So the crank has never been machined. So when I spin these in, I pretty much go in like this with the lock. Hopefully you can see that. With the lock facing there. And I just spin until it's flush. Okay? Same thing with the rod side. Make sure everything's clean. This is very critical. So you got your lock on your bearing. Same dealio. Just spin it in like so. Now another very important part is when we get underneath the vehicle, when we get ready to put this together, bearing caps always go lock to lock. So the lock on this cap, the lock on the rod, they go lock to lock. You do not put it like this, otherwise the bearing will spin. So you need to go lock to lock. In other words, this notch has to be on the same side as the notch on the rod. So your cap lock and your rod lock go lock to lock. So just remember that, lock to lock, just like that. So when you put it together, lock to lock. It's always good to stamp your pistons prior to removing them. These ones are stamped on this side, so your stamp marks will always be corresponding each other. I'm going to leave this off for now. You want to get some assembly lube, and this is where some prep work can be taking place. I already took and I cleaned the cylinder out. I put some fresh motor oil around the cylinder, and I'm going to be using some assembly lube on these bearings. It's just a matter of preference what you use, and then we'll start putting it together. Okay, before I get too far ahead of myself, Not sure if you can see that. As you can see, I got assembly lube on the bearings. What I did for the cylinders, I put some oil on a rag and I went in and I wiped and oiled down the entire cylinder. That way it's all pre-lubed. Take a look at the top of the piston. You want that facing in the same direction as you pulled it out, so it doesn't hurt to mark them, especially if there's no mark on the piston. But we have 3 other cylinders to compare it to, so we want it in the same direction. So you want to keep that in mind before installing it. Okay, since we have the other 3 pistons to compare it to, you want to make sure you're installing it in the right direction. Your rod is going to be lining up with your crank. What I did is I spun the crank so the journal is all the way down as far as it could go. That way I'm not hitting the journal with one of these studs and damaging our crank. So I'll get this down, get all the rings inside the cylinder, and then I'll go from underneath, reach up, and pull it down. It's nice to have a second hand when someone's tapping it, because sometimes you can't pull them quite that easy, but this will get us started. Okay, so keep it square. Install into the cylinder just like so. We're going to take the back side of this wooden hammer. Alright. Hey, pretty good, man. Okay, and just like so. So now our piston's installed into the cylinder. We're going to go underneath and pull it the rest of the way down. Okay, hopefully you can see what I got here. I went and turned the crank up into the rod journal. Now I'm going to install the cap. It's very critical to keep everything clean at this point. And very important, guys, remember, lock to lock. The lock on this rod is facing towards the back of the motor. So I want this lock facing towards the back of the engine as well. It's probably hard to see, guys. I use a little bit of Loctite. Yeah, just torquing it now.
Broke it?
It collapsed the ring. You'll be able to feel a little bit of play here. It shouldn't be super tight side to side as your thrush. I know everything's set good on this engine from when I built it. When you're up and down, you shouldn't feel really anything. Okay, I'm gonna try to turn this over. Bring it down. Maybe you guys have a better shot on it now. You should have a little bit side to side thrush. It shouldn't be bound up solid, but just a little bit. Okay, now with the rod down, I'm going to check the torque one more time without the extension. Okay, we're good. Okay, now that the piston's installed, I'm going to take and turn the engine over a couple times by hand. Everything feels good. Makes it not too tight. It feels good. I'm going to bring it up on number 1, top dead center.
Oh yeah, you got it. You're not allowed to hold the phone.
Should be right about there. Okay guys, that's going to be it till tomorrow. I got the oil pan back up in place. As you see, I went and picked up a gasket, put the oil pan back up so I don't get any dirt and debris into the lower crankcase. I just put some duct tape across the top of the block and this block of wood just in case it decides to come loose. Should hold it down until tomorrow.